All right, I want to welcome everyone to our digital presentation of our CCHM Speaker Series event. Tonight, we're highlighting Clark County's Historic Preservation Commission, and we're excited to have Commissioners Andy Gregg and Sean Denniston joining us for our panel discussion. Before we get started, we also want to thank our generous sponsor, Wager Audio. Without Wager Audio, this digital feed would not be possible. So if you need help with any digital needs, digital feeds, anything like that, definitely get a hold of Wager Audio. They are incredible, and you can see it in the work that they do here. Additionally, we want to thank, and they're here for us to thank, the Historic Preservation Commission. Their support year in and year out has been vital to keep our speaker series going. And because of the nature of this year, their support has allowed us to be able to bring these talks to you free of charge and digitally. And normally we'd bring them to you in the museum or other buildings in the county. So we really, really want to thank the Historic Preservation Commission for that. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and get to our talk for this evening. So let's start with Mr. Andy Gregg. Tell us a little bit about your background and why you joined the commission.
Hi, Brad. Well, when I was a little boy, my father, who practiced law on the same corner for 62 years, used to take legal notices around to be publicly posted. And so we would go to the former Central building next door to Mike Stengel's barbershop. And as my dad would post these notices, I would ask about the buildings and about the businesses. And I became interested in downtown Vancouver in particular at a very early age. And so as I grew up, different businesses and enterprises became focuses of my writing for school and college. And that included places like the Kiggins Theater and the Lucky Logger Brewery and American Music Company. And so it's been a lifelong pursuit of mine and something I remain interested in even in retirement.
That's excellent. And Sean, tell us a little bit about your background and why you've joined the commission.
Sure. Well, when I was a little boy, I didn't live here. I actually grew up in Idaho. And so I'm a transplant, which really brings, for me, I get to see the city with somewhat fresh eyes, even though I've been here for 10 years. And I have a background in architecture and historic preservation, got a bachelor's in architecture, and realized that it was really buildings that I loved, not so much design. And that's what led me to historic preservation, because I realized I really liked good design. And it just so happened that a lot of our good buildings were old buildings. And that really drew me in, studying preservation in Philadelphia and the rich history there. And then coming here to really start a family. And it's been a wonderful experience for me digging into the local history of Vancouver, because I always saw the history of buildings from kind of a national level. Every time I studied architectural history, it was always this kind of national overview, or maybe in a region. And it's so fascinating how Vancouver is different, and how the unique parts of our history, both the early European settlement and then the impacts of during the war and the impact that had on our built environment, have made Vancouver an architecturally unique place. So that's been an amazing part for me to learn more. And I'm really happy to be able to serve on the commission and have an excuse to learn more and to learn more about Vancouver's history. And I'm in my last year. We're all term limited in the commission. We serve a certain term and then we go off. So this is my last year, and it's been a real honor to serve our community.
Nice. And thank you both for doing it, because it's a volunteer position. So, I mean, you're giving your own personal time to do this. So thank you both for doing that. And Sean, tell us a little bit, what is the commission, and what is its functions? What are its functions?
Sure. So the Clark County Historic Preservation Commission has a few functions here in the county, and it serves the entire county of Clark County and then all of the cities within the county as well. And we have a couple of responsibilities. I think the big thing to keep in mind is that we really serve as a resource for historic preservation for all of the residents in our community. And we do this in several different ways. I think probably one of the big ways, and one of the more noticeable ways, is that we maintain the Clark County Heritage Register, which is a local register of historic places. And while sometimes we think about there's the National Register of Historic Places and there's a state register, It's the local register where all of the protections for historic buildings come from. Those other designations might give you a little bit more prestige, but they don't give any protections. And so the Clark County Commission is really responsible for administering the protections that protect the cultural heritage here in Clark County. And it's all kinds of buildings all over the county. And one of the great things about that is that we have a mobile app and a website where you can go and you can see all of these sites. You can see images, you can see their nominations, read about their history. So you can go ahead and go download that mobile app. But we do other things besides that. We have a historic promotions grant program that we administer. This is funded through the county, and these provide usually actually fairly small grants to local organizations who want to do things to promote our history. And we've done this every year, and we've been able to provide some great grants to some great projects that have helped record and promote our local history. We also are the ones who make decisions on a local tax credit program. So if you have a historic building, you have tax credits available to you through the property taxes. And when you do modifications, you can find yourself to be, you can qualify for this program. And the commission is the one who makes the decisions about whether or not the project qualifies or not. And then just, real general, it's a resource for the community. If people want to come, if they've got questions, they can come to the commission, they can come to the commission staff, and we can help them find the answers that they are looking for about how to deal with their historic buildings, how to protect them, how to take care of them.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. And so that's kind of a summation of what the commission does and its function. And so, Andy, you've been on the commission, I think, a couple times in the past. Talk a little bit about what it's like to be a commissioner on this.
I first joined the commission to fill an unexpired term in 2006. And in those days, the rules were that you could serve 2 3-year terms in your own right. And so that amounted to 8 years of service. And I learned a great deal during that time. And then, as Sean pointed out, I was term limited in 2014 and became chairman of the Clark County Arts Commission for 4 years. And then returned, thankfully, because some colleagues were kind enough to extend an unexpired term to me. And in July of this year, the County Council reappointed me for my last 3-year term. So it will have been a long journey. But what I wanted to say about that is that there's a lot going on with the Historic Preservation Commission. And in addition to its mission of serving owners of historic properties who are interested in a tax valuation or just listing their property on the rolls, there are also projects that we pursue in addition to giving grants. Part of the mission is projects and community outreach and helping citizens to understand about historic preservation of not only buildings, but monuments and other intangible sites. And I think one of the reasons that the service is valuable is that one thing that has struck me about Clark County is that most people are from somewhere else. And that's one of the strengths of the place, that it has struck me that Clark County has always been a destination for people who were coming to pursue the American dream. And I figure that happened as early as pioneer days, and certainly during the Second World War years, when people from all over the country migrated here to serve in war industries. And that for the people who have remained, they're curious about the history. And it's been a wonderful opportunity to not only teach about it, but to actually maintain and preserve our area's heritage. And I think Sean phrased it very well.
That's great, Andy, and thank you. And it sounds like during your time, there's been maybe specific items or things that have been pretty compelling. Do you have one story specifically that just feels compelling that you'd like to share?
I do, and I've told it many times. I saw my first big screen movie in the Kiggins Theater in 1959. And the Kiggins had always been a destination, and it's one that I have written extensively about. And so I think probably the Kiggins has been a place in which so many people experience their first real movie, maybe a first date, maybe a second date. It's a great social center. And in the late 1990s, the Kiggins closed because the family who had operated it decided it was time to retire and it was closed. And then a school principal from Portland named Chuck Nakvasel decided to acquire and renovate the Kiggins. And I insinuated myself with that restoration group and with the idea of writing the history. And this was a decade before I joined the Historic Preservation Commission. And so my major goal as commissioner was to see the Kiggins enrolled on the National Register of Historic Places, which was in fact accomplished in 2011. And that was a highlight of my history work in my career, and am delighted that the Kiggins has become and remained such a focal point for cultural events in downtown Vancouver.
And that's incredible, because for you, it's this local story and it's this local passion, and it then expresses itself as a commissioner in the work that you're doing on the commission. And that's just, yeah, thank you for doing that, Andy. That's an incredible story that connects both to your life and then all the way through to your work as a commissioner. And Sean, do you have any specific work that you've done with the commission, any compelling stories that you'd like to talk about?
Sure. We've had some of the really simple ones, and I love the stories that people bring as they talk about, their own private residences or their commercial buildings. But the one that has been the most compelling for me is, a few years ago we had a pretty big controversy because we had a Confederate monument on our register, and the Jefferson Davis Memorial Highway marker was listed on the Clark County Heritage Register. And it really confronted our whole community, I think, to really think about what is the role of having a register like this. Do we only put on it things, the history that we like, or just the history that has made an impact on our community? When we talk about the history of these places, the obligation that we have to be, really tell the full story. And ultimately, we ended up removing it from our register. And it wasn't because it was distasteful, even though it was to so many people. It really came down to that when we looked at the nomination really didn't support listing it. The nomination was not about the history that was significant, and it left that really important story off, and it was really incomplete. And that it didn't support keeping it on the register, that the real significance of that monument was the role that it played, not as part of this Civil War figure, but everything that came after. And I think that's really relevant to what's happening today. So I'm actually really proud of our community and the way that we had this conversation, and had it quite respectfully. It was a packed house. We had to move the commission out of our normal location and go to City Hall to have enough room for everyone to be able to talk. And we had people expressing a lot of different ideas, a lot of different opinions, contradictory opinions, and we worked through it in a public way. And I think that that's one of the big things about the importance of preservation, is for us to really engage our history. Yeah, we like to save old beautiful buildings, but it's also about the history. And that's actually been then for me, I think, one of the big areas of professional growth, because I came into historic preservation loving old buildings. I liked buildings. I liked good design. And I used to even joke that I'm glad other people care about the history, because I don't really care about the history. And as I've I recognize the history is important. I care about the building. But through the work that I've done on the commission and engaging the history and these stories and personalizing it, it's really altered that for me. So I still really care about the buildings, but I'm more and more engaged with the history, and I'm think more and more about how these designations aren't just to protect these buildings and these objects, but how they're meant to help our community engage the history. And in the case of the Jefferson Davis Memorial, that meant engaging a really uncomfortable and painful and sometimes shameful part of our history. And that's an important thing for us to do as well. I'm glad that we have a whole lot more examples of positive history on the register, but I'm glad that we as a community haven't shied away from the other pieces as well.
Yeah, and there's quite a few places and buildings on that register, and that's something that is a big part of what the commission does. And so, Sean, talking about kind of that looking at buildings as they're coming up and hearing both the history versus the architecture. Talk a little bit about one of the buildings that have been nominated to the register that you've been, part of that process as a commissioner, and talk a little bit about that and your takeaway.
Sure. We had one recently, the Fort Vancouver Regional Library. This is the one that was decommissioned out on Mill Plain when the new library downtown was built and was converted to a different use. But this is a lot of people's first memories of going to the library. My daughter's first experience of going to the library was at this library, and that came before the commission for listing. And I think one of the interesting things about that is, so often when we think of historic buildings, we're thinking of brick, especially here in Vancouver with all of our hidden brick. And we're thinking about those brick buildings, that pre-war building type. That's what a historic building is. But we've reached the point now where post-war buildings are getting old enough to be considered significant. And this is a mid-century modern building, built in the Pacific Northwest, and it was a really interesting example of mid-century modern architecture because it had been really adapted to the Northwest sensibilities. And I thought that it was great because here we have this opportunity to think about what is historic significance. In this case, we had a building that was significant for its architecture, but also significant for its history, the role that it played in the library system of Vancouver, which is quite extensive and throughout even Clark County. And, I think one of the reasons that this building stands out to me is I actually don't like mid-century modern. I know I have to give up my architecture cred for that, but as a style, I don't care for it very much. But that really doesn't matter. It's not about what we as the commission like or don't like, either for listing or for approving changes to listed buildings. What we like doesn't really matter. What matters is it significant? And this building's significant. It's significant because of its architecture and because of its history. And therefore, it should be on the register and it should be preserved. And, I'm glad that it's on there. And I'll look at other buildings because I like looking at those other buildings. But that doesn't change the fact that this is a significant building that should be preserved. And, I think that really exemplifies, for me, it's a great look at the process because, here you go through the process, it gets nominated, it gets listed. And then in the future, as changes need to be made, those will come before the commission and we have a set of standards, and it'll be the same thing. It doesn't matter whether or not the commissioners like or don't like the changes that are proposed. We have a set of standards, and if they meet the standards, it gets approved. If they don't, then it doesn't. And it's laid out for everyone, and everyone can have certainty. They know what they're expecting when they're listing a building because they can look at our ordinance and they can see what will be required. And I think one last thing to say about that one is that also gets at this kind of site and building element that sometimes we list a whole site because it's the whole site that is significant and what happened at the larger site. And sometimes it's just, we list the building. And in this case, it was just the building. And so that nomination is limited just to the building. And that's in part because of the changes that are happening in that part of town. We recognize the building needed to be, protected, and the site, it was not the same issues. So, I think that I was happy to be a part of that, and I think it really exemplifies what we do.
Excellent. Thanks, Sean. And then Andy, you've also been a part of the process too. Can you talk about one nomination and kind of your thoughts on going through that process?
We have an example coming up that exemplifies a recognition that is more than the sum of its parts. And that would be on the Columbia River near Washougal, called Parkersville. And like so many areas in Clark County, there are names, but their significance may be lost. They could just be a wide spot in the road or a whistle stop for the railroad, whether it's Lacamas or Pumpkin Center, Philida, Sarah, Barberton, or Louisville. Parkersville is the same kind of place, except its history is distinctive in that it was a stop for steamboats along the Columbia River, bearing cargo and other kinds of materials going upriver. And in the time of the American Civil War, a company called the Oregon Steam Navigation Company began operation moving freight and cargo and food items up and down the Columbia River. And Parkersville was the stop long before there was a Camas or Washougal, which are not exactly on the Columbia River. And so Parkersville is going to incorporate not only economic history, but is going to be able to interpret the importance of the Columbia River as a transportation network, as well as focusing on Columbia River history. And so another interesting item is that whereas today it is often taught in Washington State history that Lewis and Clark on their return trip east spent several weeks in Washougal, the reality is it was more nearly Parkersville. And so Parkersville is, whereas Clark County residents of a certain age remember a restaurant there called the Parker House. Well, Parkersville is going to be a confluence of so many interesting stories and influences and really integral stories that are going to inform those who visit the site about just how much was going on 150 years ago.
Thank you, Andy. And Parkersville is unique because it is a site. There were no structures there that were nominated. It was actually because of the significance of that space that it was established as a historic place, right?
Mm.
So, we talked about the nominations to the register, which is a huge part of what you do also, but then there is also the historic promotions grant. Would you each of you like to kind of share a story in relation to that? Because that really provides funds to the community from the commission, that people are able to do historic preservation. So do you, both of you want to share maybe just one story from the historic promotions grant that you found compelling?
The one thing that I'll bring up about that, we have a subcommittee that goes through all the grant applications, and they look at each one, and we've got a scoring process, because we really want to be fair. We only have a limited number of funds available, and there's so many good projects that are often out there, looking to happen. And I got to serve on that subcommittee 1 year, and the thing that struck me was just how much is going on in our community. And I would look at some of these grants, and sometimes it would just be a few $100s to do a pretty substantial piece of work, the recording oral histories before they're lost. And hey, we just need the equipment. If we could get the equipment, then we've got all these people and we can record their oral histories, or helping with an interpretive center, or helping some of the smaller historical organizations in Clark County. And so I think that that's the thing that really strikes me about the promotion grants, is that the ability to make widespread impact with a series of smaller grants, and it really showcases for me that we have organizations here in Clark County who are trying to do good work, who are really working to promote and save our local history. And I'm glad that we're able to support them, because they're really doing great work, and it's great to see that these funds are having this direct impact, and to see them sometimes come back because we did this and now we're going to move on to this next project because we've got more that we can do. So that for me has been the big part about the grants, and it was great to see that really deep down by serving on the subcommittee that does all the reading that goes through every single grant. And they do, every single grant application is going to be read by multiple people and is going to be evaluated that way. And so I'm really happy that that's something that our commission gets to play a role in, because looking around at other commissions in the country, not all of them get to do something like that.
And Andy, did you want to add a little bit about the promotions grant program?
Well, Clark County Historic Preservation Commission, unlike some advisory boards, do have a budget to work with. And as the director of the museum, Brad, I don't have to tell you that sometimes a few $100s makes a big difference in what you can and cannot do. And so the one item that I served on the subcommittee last year, and one of the items came from Veniceburg, which is the site northeast of Hawkinson that was the site of Scandinavian immigrants in the 19th century. And in preserving a building there, they were in danger of closing because some wiring was not up to code. And so for a very modest grant of a few $100s that we were able to provide, that site and operation was able to continue against a challenge that they may not have been able to overcome otherwise. And so also historic societies in general, and in Clark County in particular, often see a phased program of incremental improvements. And one of the things that the Historic Preservation Commission can do is assist in those incremental phase 1, phase 2 kinds of improvements, whether it's electrical, plumbing, roofing, security. And it's very satisfying to know that for a modest request that we were able to grant, that that history could be preserved in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and from the side of a grant recipient, it's an amazing program because pieces of the Chalachee Prairie Railroad have been maintained and extended because of this grant. 1,000 images have been digitized and are available online for Two Rivers Heritage Museum. 1,000 images for the Vancouver Barracks Military Association have been digitized and are available online. And then us alone through the Historic Promotions Grant, what we've been able to build through the museum is a inter-organizational relationship with Washington State University, Vancouver's Library and Archive, where we've been able to digitize, because of this grant, 17,000 images from our collection. Over 200 oral histories have been digitized and are available in full online. We have, numerous maps that are available. And then just this year alone through this grant, we were able to put together a partnership with the League of Women Voters, Two Rivers Heritage Museum, and WCU to digitize some of the League's records, some of the Camas Business Women's Association records, and also some of the Association of University Women for Vancouver's records. And this huge amount of digital content and digital material and digital preservation that we've been able to, I even forgot, we have 10 years of the Vancouver Independent text searchable online because of this grant. That massive amount of digital material and preservation that's been done locally, and then also all of these projects, I don't think people realize this is pretty, I think, unique to Clark County, that we've supported people to be able to do these projects, whether it's $100 or it's $15,000 to do a project. This has been an incredibly powerful preservation resource, and it's all thanks to the commission that's able to put this together. So I can't thank the commission enough, and the county for what they do to support preservation through this grant. it means a lot to everybody. I mean, North Clark, you know, they were also a part of the grant. They have new display case work because of the grant. I mean, just everybody gets a little piece of that pie, which is so helpful.
Yeah,
So
I think one of the things about the grant that I really like is, when we look at our criteria for giving them out, we want to see it go throughout the entire county. And so that's actually, one of our criteria is making sure that all the parts of the county are being covered. And one of the things that I've been really pleased to see over my time on the commission is the way that the historical organizations in Clark County have begun to work together more and more. You know, unfortunately, so often we see in communities, uh, this attitude in local historic organizations about there's only so much funding and we got to fight for it, and we're not going to work together because we have to get our little piece of it. And what we've seen is the Clark County organizations work together and collaborate on things and have a bigger impact than they would have if they had kind of kept that provincial attitude that you see in so many places. And I actually want to thank you, Brad, for that. And I know that this is about us, but I think that the Clark County Historical Museum has been a big part of that, of reaching out to other organizations and trying to help. And so I've been so happy to see these partnerships come through the program, because man, those partnerships, they intensify the impact of the program even more. And that's great that we can really maximize the impact that comes through. I mean, it is limited funds, but wow, and a lot has been able to happen.
well, thank you, Sean. I appreciate that. And it's, we have an amazing network of museums in the community and a lot of people that just want to make sure we save stuff for future generations. And, it's just been incredible to be able to do that. So we're getting close to wrapping up. Is there anything that you two would like to talk about that we haven't covered so far in our conversation before we close out?
I would like to say that sometimes the government and its commissions and boards and advisory committees are seen as erecting obstacles to the citizens to prevent them from getting things done. A couple of our former chairs have emphasized the importance of community outreach. And so I have always appreciated the stance of the Historic Preservation Commission as being there to help people learn how to preserve their historic buildings, and that we are there to offer good advice so that they can get the goals accomplished that are valuable to them, as opposed to standing in the way and somehow saying, oh no, we're not going to let you do that. I think the better service is to say, we recognize what you want to do, and here is how we can help you get it done. And so I think that's a real service, as opposed to merely preserving history for history's sake, or preserving buildings because they happen to meet the criteria in terms of longstanding.
I absolutely agree. I have to say that of all the things that we do, probably the thing that I enjoy the most is when we have a historic building owner come in and with questions like, I've got this building and here's the situation, and can you help me figure out what to do? I can think of a case that we had not too long ago where the owner came and they had a late 1800s building, and they absolutely loved it, and they were fixing it up, but their concern was they had a bedroom upstairs, and it had an old historic window where the sill came really low, and they had a toddler, and they were concerned. I've got a toddler who could fall out this window, and what can I do about this? Because if I replace it with a higher window, I mean, what's the historic impact of that going to be? And so we were able to talk with the owner and let them know about, there's other options. You don't have to swap out the window and do these things that are going to harm the historic integrity, and these other options might actually be cheaper for you. And to be able to help people outside of the regulatory context, that's my favorite part. I love talking with people about their buildings, and that's something that we are there for. If people have questions, they can come to the commission, they can come to the commission staff, and we can help them find answers.
Well, thank you, Sean, and thank you, Andy, so much for taking some time to talk with us and have this conversation. Um, it's one of those things that the museum and the commission has started to work closer and closer together over these years, and it's just been a vital relationship. And we're all working towards the same goal and trying to make sure that these spaces are preserved. So I thank you both for volunteering your time on a regular basis for the commission, and also for volunteering your time to do our talk tonight. And with that, I'm going to let you two go for the rest of your day. And thank you so much. And so I just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. And we will have another talk in September. So keep an eye on our Facebook and on our website for our next speaker series. We'll keep doing our talks all the way through November. And we again want to thank Wager Audio as our sponsor for this talk. Again, this digital feed is thanks to them. And then also thank you again to the Historic Preservation Commission for sponsoring year in and year out our talks, which just makes such a vital difference in communicating history to people in our community. So thank you all for joining us, and have a great evening, and we will see you next month.
Pleasure, Brandon.
Thank you, everyone.